From the studios of KPFK Pacifica Radio in Los Angeles, this is Uprising, and I'm Sonali Kolhatkar. It's Friday, May 15th, 2015. We'll have a conversation with the legendary poet Sonia Sanchez, one of the pioneers of the Black arts movement, about the history of the civil rights movement and the importance of art in activism. And West Papua's exiled leader Benny Wenda joins us from London, where he was just prevented from boarding a flight to the U.S. He'll explain what happened and why he's fighting to free his nation from Indonesian occupation. That's coming up after the news. Joining us now to analyze today's headlines is Chenjerai Kumanyika, communications professor at Clemson University in South Carolina. Hi, Chenjerai.
Hey, how you doing?
Doing well, thanks so much for joining us. A major battle has broken out in the Iraqi city of Ramadi between national security forces and soldiers loyal to the Islamic State in Iraq and Syria, or ISIS. The militant Sunni group launched a new offensive this week involving car bombs and suicide attacks. Ramadi is only 70 miles from Baghdad and is key to the U.S.-backed Iraqi war against ISIS. Already more than 100,000 Iraqi civilians have fled the city. Meanwhile, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, the leader of ISIS, who was thought to be gravely injured in an airstrike, just released a recording. In it, he mentions the Saudi war in Yemen and calls on Muslims the world over to join his fight from wherever they are. Well, Chenjerai, just when we thought that Iraq and the U.S. might have been winning the war on ISIS, the group resurges. Is there any realistic victory that can come out of this?
Well, no, I think you're right to actually question how does this incident fit in the larger narrative that ISIS is losing the war on Iraq. I mean, you have this audio which comes out, and this kind of appears to be maybe an effort of ISIS to sort of thumb their nose at the attempt to assassinate al-Baghdadi. He makes no mention of any kind of injuries or really any form of weakness in this audio. Of course, there are those who have questioned how new this audio is. Was this something that was previously recorded before the assassination? And the other big issue is the fact that they've raised the black flag in Ramadi, which is a much more central city than previous cities that ISIS had taken. So the question that they have to ask really is, what does this mean for the larger narrative as we put out? And the other issue is, what diplomatic options and structural options in terms of the economy, in terms of increasing Sunni representation in the government are necessary to complement the military interventions?
Here in the United States, Chicago police embroiled in the controversy over torture and abuse at a so-called black site called Homan Square have been rocked by another scandal. A man named Angel Perez became the 13th former inmate to detail his horrific experience to media. Speaking to The Guardian's Spencer Ackerman, Perez described being sodomized by a police officer with what may have been the barrel of a handgun. And in Miami Beach, Florida, a full-blown police-related scandal has erupted over private communications that reveal overtly racist and misogynist email threads among officers. As has been seen in private police communications before, there were racist jokes involving President Obama and others making light of domestic violence. More than 500 trials are being reviewed in which officers involved in the scandal are witnesses. Chenjerai, are we still expected to believe that the problem with police is just that of a few bad apples?
Well, unfortunately, the bad apples framing won't die. But, the recent movements for, accountability in police with relation to police brutality have kind of seen a victory in Chicago as that city takes important steps to provide reparations for victims of police torture. But when you hear the testimony of people like Angel Perez, it becomes clear that this is really the minimum that is needed. The Miami emails and similar emails in Ferguson and other police departments illustrate deep and systemic problem with the culture of law enforcement. But we also have to think about the economics of law enforcement and the economics of cities and how that interacts with police practices. So I think when we take all these things into consideration, what we really need is a fundamental rethinking of law enforcement in the United States.
And finally, the legendary blues musician B.B. King has passed away. King passed away in his sleep at the age of 89 in Las Vegas yesterday. He was one of the most important blues artists to have ever lived and is credited with popularizing the music form to a wide audience. B.B. King was so prolific that he performed in literally hundreds of concerts a year, well into his 70s. Born Riley B. King to Mississippi sharecroppers on a cotton plantation, he began performing during Jim Crow segregation and went on to be one of the country's most decorated and recognized musicians. In its obituary of him, the New York Times described King's music as, quote, a stinging guitar with a shimmering vibrato, notes that coiled and leapt like an animal, and a voice that groaned and bent with the weight of lust, longing, and lost love. Well, Chenjerai, how do you reflect on B.B. King's legacy today?
Well, I'll probably be reflecting by listening to some B.B. King today and maybe even having a sip of bourbon. But B.B. King was really a primary architect of what we recognize as blues. And this is because he, partially because he expanded the audience of blues by blending his particular take, regionally situated take, with a broader cosmopolitan sensibility. And it seems like his work as a DJ informed that. But I mean, if you listen to the nuance and emotion of his guitar on the songs that we all know, The Thrill Is Gone and many other ones, I mean, it's just like impossible not to be moved and to feel complex emotions. B.B. King also was born on a plantation, as you talked about, and came to have tremendous wealth. But I don't think he really illustrates any kind of simple story of meritocracy. His music and performances were really an aesthetic testament to the enduring struggle and complicated race and class politics of the Black American experience.
Well, Chenjerai, I want to thank you as always for joining us today, and we'll talk to you again next week.
Thank you.
Chenjerai Kumanyika is a communications professor at Clemson University in South Carolina. This is Uprising, and by the way, do subscribe to our TV program on YouTube. We have a YouTube channel at youtube.com/uprising with Sonali. It's very important that we sustain the TV production of this show because, well, we're nearly out of the money that we raised a year ago during our Indiegogo campaign. We hope you'll join us. And we'll be right back after this break. Welcome back to Uprising. I'm Sonali Kolhatkar. Just as it's been 50 years since the March on Selma and many landmark moments in the history of the Black struggle for civil rights, it was half a century ago that the groundbreaking Black arts movement was pioneered by such great activist artists as Amiri Baraka, Maya Angelou, and my guest, Sonia Sanchez. Sonia Sanchez has written more than 15 books of poetry and stories and was named the first poet laureate of the city of Philadelphia in 2011. Born in Birmingham, Alabama, she eventually moved to Harlem, New York, where she became active in the arts and in civil rights activism. She was a member of New York's Congress of Racial Equality, or CORE, and also deeply influenced by Malcolm X. She taught and lived in San Francisco before eventually making her way to Philadelphia, where she still lives. Her 1969 book of poetry called Homecoming catapulted her into the national stage, and her latest book, Morning Haiku, was published in 2010. She's written and published plays, won major awards including the National Book Critics Circle Award and the American Book Award. In the fall of 2014, she co-edited an anthology called SOS, Calling All Black People, a Black Arts Movement Reader. Ms. Sanchez was in Los Angeles for a speaking event at Cal State LA yesterday, and the Uprising crew had the opportunity to meet her in her hotel room, where I had a wide-ranging conversation with the legendary poet. Welcome to the program, Ms. Sonia Sanchez.
Thank you so very much, my dear sister. It's good being here.
Well, this is a seminal year. 2015 is the 50th anniversary of so many important historical events in terms of the civil rights movement, with the Selma March around 50 years ago, the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act, and you were around when that happened. And I'm wondering if you can reflect on those tumultuous years and these anniversaries that are being celebrated and commemorated this year.
My dear sister, it is, I'm in September 9th, I turned 80. And, and I thought, gee, I've become my father. I've become Gwendolyn Brooks and all these other people who had made 80, Elizabeth Catlett, all these great people I knew. But the great thing is that if you live long enough, you'll hit 80 and perhaps 90 even. And, of course, part of your life has been experiencing so many of these things that were important events in this country. Those things that made for change. Someone said to me recently in an interview from overseas, what does it mean? Some people say, Professor Sanchez, there is no change at all. And I said, well, if you lived during those years, you realize there's a lot of change. It might not be all the change that you want. And one of the interviews I just had with Katie Couric was the whole idea of To Kill a Mockingbird, the significance of a book that was written at the time, that was written about the 1930s, but it's a book written in 1960, and what that really meant, and about a man who actually defied an entire town in order to defend a black man. Well, my dear sister, who was accused of raping a white woman, but if you understand the civil rights movement, you also go back, remember the Scottsboro Boys, that a lot of that was happening at that particular time in Alabama, where I was born. And you understand at some point that one individual decided to fight a system. The problems that he didn't win, that the young man, those young Scottsboro boys, and in the book, To Kill a Mockingbird, the man was hanged. And so one of the things that is significant about the civil rights movement and the movement of people in the South and also in the North in a slightly different fashion is that, in order to effect change, you do need a group action. You do need a group response to an injustice and to things that are not working well. So you can have the singular action of a person who is indeed very much involved with being a just person. But in order to really affect change forever, or for a long time, you need the mass movement, which also happened at some particular point. And we saw all the mass movements, happening. I was in New York Core, and we thought we were the baddest thing going on the planet Earth because we were the most radical, you named it. We went and picketed, whatever. And I like to tell the story. My dad told the story with a crew from Germany once. The question was asked, was your daughter always so progressive and activist? And my dad said, and I saw it and I fell out laughing, he said, no, she was so quiet. All she did was read, and she stayed in her room. He said, she never gave me any problems. It's true. I was this perfect child along the way. But what happened is that events of the world happened, and one of the things that happened is that being in New York Core, I was at the office one morning, and someone called and said that the unions were going to build an extension on Harlem Hospital at 135th Street. And we had been trying to open up the electrical union, right, and the plumbers union to black and Puerto Ricans, and they refused to even consider it. And so we found out it was, that was going to happen. So we came up to Harlem and we threw this massive picket line around Harlem Hospital. Well, my dad told the story that he heard all the noise, "We shall not be moved," we were singing, and he focused his binoculars and saw his daughter downstairs, down there in the streets. We had blocked off the streets. No cars could pass at all. And he was so upset. But also he turned the binoculars up the street, and he saw policemen coming on horseback. And we didn't see them. Our backs were turned. We did not see them coming at all. And he didn't. He dropped his binoculars on his terrace and went running to the elevator. It didn't come fast enough, and he went running down the steps. But as luck would have it, but you know, my dear sister, there's no such thing as luck. It's just the work that we do, you know, to effect change, you know, how we decide to effect change, and that is not through luck. The first black police captain was being driven to work, and he came around the corner. He couldn't get to the precinct, so he jumps out the car. He says, "What do you people want?" And we said, "We want to open up the unions to black and Puerto Ricans." And he says, "Well, don't do it in the street, go downtown." So they went inside and got the union leaders, and we went downtown, actually, and all day until 2 o'clock in the morning, we negotiated back and forth. And finally, the union person said, okay, give us some names, give us some names. And we were so young, and we didn't expect to win. None of us had any names. All the names were back in the office, but I stopped and said, "I can give you one name now." And I gave the name of my brother, who was an electrical wizard, you know, who took care of everything in the house. And so by the time I got home about 3:30, the phone was ringing, and I knew it was my dad. In those days, the phone would ring forever and ever and ever and ever and ever, you know, until you picked it up, right? And so I got a cup of coffee, I lit a cigarette, and then I said, "Yeah, Dad," you know. He said, Sonia, why don't you just get married and have some babies and move to Long Island or New Rochelle? And I was rude to my dad. I won't tell you what I said, but then I said, Dad, tell Wilson, my brother, your son, to report to the union because he will now join the union. And he said a very strange thing. He said, "Sonia, you mean there's a job?" I said, "What do you think we're in the streets doing?" "Yes, it's a job." And that was the opening up of the unions in a place called New York City at the time that it should have been opened up. And you see, you reflect on that, and someone says to you, "There's no change." You say, "You must be out of your head," because there was change. Change at great risk for many people, change at deaths, also to change with people, students who gave up their careers in universities to go into the movement, bright people, but they knew that part was very important.
Now, this was also the time that was the beginning of a very much related movement, and that's the Black Arts movement that you've been a pioneer in alongside such great figures as Amiri Baraka and the late, great Maya Angelou. So this is also something that people are sort of celebrating now. How important has art been, and was art even at that time, to the movement?
Well, my dear sister, before, that's what that book talks about. The book is, we just did an anthology on the Black Arts at the University of Mass Press, Professor John Bracey and Professor John Smethurst and myself. And what we reflect on in it, about a 20-page intro, is simply that public art was not in play in America until Black arts came along. And then you had the mural arts happening. You had the government giving fellowships and monies, you know, to various organizations so people could come and do their individual work. You had maybe someone going along and doing simple things, but this was major because at some point we said, you can do this public art, it can be revolutionary. You can do murals that, of course, we all learned from Mexico, right? Mm-hmm. And the great muralists there, that will be so important for a people. You can do a poem that can be political and great at the same time. And of course, this is what we did. And this book is dedicated to Baraka because it's called SOS, Calling on Black People. You know, it's not, and it's indicative of what was going on at that particular time. But Baraka turned around and said, hold it, there are problems here in this country, and art can affect change. Art can be a place that people can learn from, and you can write a poem that will change people. And it's dedicated also to people like Brother Martin and Brother Malcolm. We contend in the introduction, my dear sister, that the people who influenced BAM, the Black Arts Movement, were two important people, John Coltrane, you know, and Malcolm, you know, and John Coltrane, who said, I can go out of this Western construct, you know, and bring you music that will go someplace else and be completely important, completely revolutionary, you know. And Malcolm said, hey, you know, if you live in a community, you should be very much involved with, you know, constructing that community in the way that you want it to be constructed. So you have, but by the time we get to BAM, they're both dead. And who's the person who's then going to lead a movement like this is Baraka, you know. And you get all the great writers. You get, you know, of course, Baraka. You get Larry Neal. You get Hakeem Adabuti, you know. You get Askir Toure. You get Maya, Sister Maya. You get Sister Toni Morrison's in there with her bluest eye. You get all of these people coming up. You get June Jordan, Audre Lorde. I mean, all these amazing people, you know, who are coming up, constructing poetry that says it can be about change, and it can be great, and it can be beautiful. And you get all the great art. You get the plays, Ed Bullins, you know, with his great plays also, too. You get the plays that all of a sudden will get on Broadway because of that push and move of the Black Arts BAM. And then you get Black Studies coming out of that also, too. And I came to a place called San Francisco to begin something called Black Studies. And I remember telling my dad, I'm going to California. My dad said, oh, no, you're not. I mean, New York is the only place to live. And, you know, I was so naive about California, my dear sister, that I've been saying to people, you want a heavy coat because I'm going to California. It's warm and hot out there. And someone said in a very droll fashion, you don't know San Francisco, do you, Sonia? It gets very damp out there. And thank God I kept my heavy coat. Yeah.
Earlier you were mentioning that your father thought of you as a quiet person who only read books. How did poetry help you find your voice, and how has poetry helped young people? You know, you're obviously in the academic world as well, and you're teaching English. How can poetry be a tool for finding one's voice?
Oh, my dear sister, what we found out about poetry, I call poetry the definition, because there are many definitions of poetry. In an essay I wrote many years ago, I said poetry is subconscious conversation. It is much the work of those who listen, you know, and those also, you know, who write it. One of my teachers at NYU when I was in grad school was a woman by the name of Louise Bogan, who was a classical poet, you know, who taught us form. And we were quite upset by the idea that she would teach form, because, you know, we were going to be these poets, you know, who didn't need to deal with form. But I'm so glad she taught us form, because she made me truly understand that all free verse has some core, some basis of form. But what we did there with poetry is that we took from other countries and other people. We took from also the beats who were right before us and around the same time. You know, Ginsberg, a great beat poet, Paul Blackburn, a man I loved very much at that particular time, you know, and the men and women who moves thusly, and also many of the poets who also were down in the village, like, oh gosh, I'm blanking on his name, here in California. We were talking about him last night. Forgive me, the yellow back, broken down, isn't it? Wow.
Ishmael Reed.
Ish, forgive me, Ish. Ishmael Reed, you can edit that part out probably. Ish, and all these people who came out of the village also too. What you understood is that you could say a poem and you could affect change. The people in the audience, it was almost like church on some levels. People in the audience would stand up and be so invigorated to go out and to do something, to change their lives. That was the beauty. And, you know, I was saying last night at dinner, you know, with some of the people that I'm involved with here at this particular time, that the great thing is that we learn from people like Coltrane and Malcolm. Malcolm would involve you with a conversation. He would bring you up to great heights, but he was wise enough to bring you down before you went out. And so we learned from him the cadence of Malcolm's speaking, the cadence and the use of words, and also the use of humor. If you study the black poetry, the use of humor is all over it. And so you made people laugh at the same time that maybe they were crying or maybe they were angry, but you made balance. There was a balance to the poetry, but it was poetry that said simply, you know, I can tell you about change in the world, in this country. I can tell you what it means to be a human being, because the question we were attempting to answer at that time was, what does it mean to be human? If you have been discriminated against, if you come out of slavery, right? If you come, if you live in a place where nobody respects you, if you're in a place where the police come in to your neighborhood and pick up the young boys and beat them up, at the station, what does it mean to be human if you go into a classroom and the teacher comes in Harlem and says, I don't know why I'm going to teach you anything looking at the girls because all you're going to do is get pregnant. Or she would look at the boys and said, I don't know why I want to teach you because you're just going to end up in jail. And I remember, coming from a place called Birmingham, Alabama, where the teachers loved you and constantly taught you. I remember thinking, not me, sucker, right? That's not going to happen to me. But just think of all of the people that it did happen to because there were people who did not respect them, and you began to think of Carlos Fuentes, who said, we only treat people like that when we cannot imagine ourselves also being those people. So what we try to do as poets is that we try to imagine ourselves being someone, whatever, which meant then when once you did that, you had the greatest respect for them.
Now, this year is also the 30th anniversary. We started talking about anniversaries. It was the 30th anniversary of the bombing of the Move House in Philadelphia, yes. And you were there, where you were living at the time, but I understand right at the moment it happened, you happened to be out of town?
Yeah, the Sunday I left, I was heading, I finished my classes, I got my grades in, and I was heading off for this huge conference in Georgia. It was not in Atlanta. You took a plane to Atlanta, then you took a small plane to some place in Ushkush, Georgia. I'm being facetious now. And then someone picked you up and drove you to this little town, which I found out later was a town that had been heavily segregated in the South. And by the time I will reach my hotel room, the good thing about Georgia is that they had CNN at that time. And I turned it on and boom, I am watching destruction in Philadelphia. And of course, I called my children right away. And I said, tomorrow, when you go to school, there will be a discussion. And we have to talk about what we do as moral people. And my children said, I talked to them about the first time a bomb was dropped on an American city was in Tulsa, Oklahoma, in the 1920s. And majority of people killed, it dropped on a black neighborhood, and they were black folks. And so I said, you must have this information, because I said, if you take this position, you will be attacked in a verbal sense. And so they said, mommy, okay, whatever. And so I would then go the next morning. I am opening the conference, my dear sister, and at 9 o'clock in the morning, I'm watching 1,000 people looking at me, and I know they're thinking about one thing. They, too, have been up watching what was going on in Move, right? And I give this speech, and they were so appreciative. They stood up and clap, sat down, Q&A. First question, Professor Sanchez, what kind of people live in Philadelphia who would drop a bomb on a civilian population? And I said, my dear brother, I can say two things. I said, I am not here to defend the mayor, the police chief, the fire chief, and all those other people who were involved with this. I said, but my dear brother, what I do understand that the people of Philadelphia are also completely alarmed and startled by the dropping of a bomb on a civilian population. I said, it was not a moral act at all. This is not what you do. And then I explained to them, and they didn't even know about Tulsa. I explained to them about Tulsa, Oklahoma, and people said, really? Did that really happen? And I said, yes, and I explained to them, the consequences of that and what happened. So one of the men stood up and said, well, I am so glad, Professor Sanchez, you said that, because if you had said something else, I was going to take all my students out of this auditorium, because he said, thank you so very much. Well, you had to take a moral position on the idea that you would allow a bomb dropped on the civilian population for the second time in American history. That night, I talked to my children. That afternoon, I talked to my children, and both of them had tears. You could hear them kind of get filled up, and they were attacked because I don't mean physically. But people were saying, well, they have this funny hair, these dreads, and they were, in quotes, dirty, and they upset the neighborhood.
This is the Move organization.
Yeah. And this is what children were saying to my children in class when they said, you cannot do this to human beings at all. But they were saying, well, it was okay to do it because, and one of my sons, Magoo, said, Mom, he said, I said, yeah, you can disagree with people, but you don't kill them. The whole point, he said, of democratic country is that you leave room for discussion, but above all, you don't drop a bomb on the civilian population at all. And so I was so proud of them that I was going to a place called, when I got back home, Oslo, Norway, for a big conference with Jimmy Baldwin and the great Mexican poet Octavio Paz, right? And I said to them, because they had taken a position, your children should be rewarded, you know, for taking moral positions. I said, I'm going to take you with me to Oslo, Norway. And what was interesting about that, I opened the conference, my dear sister, and then while I was being interviewed for a documentary, they were interviewing my children. And they asked them, what do you think about your mother? And they also took the same position. The next day in the newspapers, right, they had, you know, and it had to be translated for me, Professor Sanchez's children take the same position she takes. But as they interviewed me, there was a cameraman who was quite distressed. You know, he was moving back and forth. You know how you note it, but you still kind of out of the side of your ear. The first question, it was ostensibly an interview about my poetry, you know, and about the conference and what I thought about the conference. It was this documentary they were doing about the conference. The first question was the same question they had posed to me in Georgia. Professor Sanchez, what kind of people? You know, and I said, you know, good people. Good people live in Philadelphia, but I'm not talking about, you know, the officials at all. I'm not here defending them. It was completely an unjust act, an incorrect act, you know, period, I said. And the cameraman stopped and said, I'm so glad that you said that, because I was going to leave if you had said something else. I mean, you didn't realize the impact until you travel around the country. For 1 year, being on the road like this, I defended Philadelphia, you know, against, I mean, an attack. I mean, every place you went, they said, Philadelphia, you're from Philadelphia. Oh, Philadelphia. Oh, your city dropped the bomb. I said, no, we didn't drop the bomb. The officials dropped the bomb, and some officials let a whole city block burn. But I said, so I defended us as moral people there, you know, who did not do that at all. It was a very interesting year when that happened. Yeah.
I'm wondering if you can also reflect at this time on someone who has been very vocal about the MOVE organization, also a Philadelphia resident currently behind bars, and that is, of course, Mumia AbuJamal, the great journalist and someone who many people consider a political prisoner. And people are very worried that Mumia is dying right now and is being sort of allowed to die through medical neglect. And how important has his voice been? He's, you know. Yeah.
Well, my dear sister, you know, when there was a trial, Mia, in the city of Philadelphia, 3 people testified for him. Father Paul Washington, state senator, and I'm blanking on his name also too, and myself. I was amazed because people, he was a great young journalist, very political, and I was surprised that people, when I was being, you know, there, I was attacked by the prosecutor as a person who was the lover of people who kill police. That's what, and that attack brought for another trial, by the way. The lawyers took that, you know, text, right? And that's why they got another trial, because it was completely off the record, you know, incorrect. I turned to the judge and said simply, you know, because I watched Perry Mason, and I said, shouldn't his lawyer object to this, you know? And I looked at the jury, because it very evidently was incorrect. The judge said nothing. As a consequence, they were able to overturn that and do another one. I testified for Brother Mumia as a character witness, so that Father Paul Washington and Richardson was the state assembly's name. And we were character witness saying simply what he did. You know, we didn't know what had happened there. We knew there were some contradictions about what happened, and we knew that he needed to have a fair trial, which evidently he was not going to get there. I have visited him also too, and have written to him. I am always amazed by the brilliance of this young man. And of course, I was with Angela. Sister Angela was up. We were together up in UMass at Amherst having dinner, and my phone kept. I had it turned off, but it kept. You know how it buzz, right. And finally I said, let me take this. It was my son who said, Mom, let me tell you what's happening. And I leaned over here while someone was speaking, and I said, Angela, this is what is happening to Mumia, because she's been a supporter also of Mumia, along with the great Ozzie Davis, and then after Ozzie died, Sister Ruby Davis also too, Ruby D. Davis. And so we made that announcement there. So I think you're right. When you're in prison like that, people will allow you to die. You're not going to get the best physician. You're not going to get the best care, and you're going to get people who are completely antagonistic towards you at that particular point. But I'm just hoping that he can pull through it. I'm hoping that people are humane enough to give him the proper care at some point, because it is supposed to be a justice system. You're supposed to get into here, and you are supposed to be treated well. But you and I know that does not happen in this place called America.
Yeah.
Because one of the worst histories of taking care and not taking care of their prisoners.
Yeah. Many people see the mass incarceration today, particularly that is disproportionately impacting African Americans, as just an extension and continuation of slavery. And at the same time, on the streets today, we have a burgeoning new movement that has been in the news more so than usual, and that's the Black Lives Matter movement. And I'm wondering if you can reflect on those issues, given that those things that didn't get fixed after the Civil Rights Movement, that remain, the mantle is being taken up, it seems, by young folks.
Right. Well, we're always so happy that young folk look up at some point and say simply, whoops, this is a problem. And you say, yes, it's still a problem. It has been a problem for a very long time. That's why this, I was autographing the book I was talking about, and young people came up with the book like this, saying, oh, whoa, we didn't know that this happened here in America. I mean, when they read the poetry and they read the short stories, right, and they read the plays, they said, well, we didn't realize that this happened during your time also, too. They tend to think this is all new, that there's no history involved. And what the book shows is that each generation has got to respond to the racism, what I call the indecency of a country, the non-morality of a country, the non-morality of its leaders. And so they are seeing how we responded, right? And now they realize that they must respond. So yes, you have people, organizations coming up, Black Lives Matter. You see people who have still been involved with welfare in New York City. You see people all around the country now are gathering together saying, we must respond to this in a very important way, because young people are being killed. And that's why you go back and you read some of the poetry in that book. You see Audre Lorde responding to like a grandmother in the Bronx. The police will burst into her house and kill her. Eleanor Bumpurs, right? Or a young black male, would get killed in the streets. Well, it's the repetition. And young people, what the young people were saying to me with the books, clutched to their hearts, I didn't know that there were young people who've been killed before. And you didn't want to say, yes, unhappy enough, we've seen it before, and we responded in the same way. And I'm saying simply that response must be there, but there's another part of that response also too, and that is a demand of going into the Congress, going into the Senate, going in and demanding of the Congress people, and the senators, that something else happens here. It is what I call neo-slavery. It is the new slavery. It is that in a place called Pennsylvania, you can shut down schools and build 2 new prisons. So it means that if you shut down the schools, if you make the schools overcrowded, the kids won't go to school. We'll get them in prison. prison, we'll get them from almost free labor, whatever. So I will build what they call the great prisons, but they will not build great schools. So part of this is yes demonstrating, but part is also redirecting attention to what is going on, in education. What is going on in this system, that imprisons young people. What is going on when I was in a place called Alabama, leaving Alabama one Sunday, that you had a judge who was affiliated with his brother-in-law who ran a prison, and the judge was then sending the young men into the prison so therefore they could do the work. So this kind of immoral acts going on in a place called America, but also the idea what Martin Luther King said many years ago, that we need to have people who can get a guaranteed wage. And if you have guaranteed wage at some particular point, then it puts less pressure on families. Families stay together. People can then be very responsible to their children. And so we need to push issues with the federal government and state governments also too. So it is demonstration, but also people sitting down in a wise fashion, beginning to reconstruct, what it means really to have a humane government, a humane city and state dealing with their people.
Sonia Sanchez is a legendary poet, one of the founders of the Black Arts Movement, speaking to me in her hotel room last night when she was visiting Southern California. This is Uprising. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Uprising. I'm Sonali Kolhatkar. The leader of the movement to free West Papua, Benny Wenda, was scheduled to be on our show live in studio today. But yesterday at the airport in London, when he attempted to check in for his flight to the United States, he was detained by Department of Homeland Security officials who informed him that his 10-year visa had been cancelled. Mr. Wenda had last visited the United States only months ago when he met with members of Congress to draw attention to the plight of West Papuans under Indonesian rule. More than 40 years ago, Indonesia annexed the country now known as West Papua from the Netherlands. The country's indigenous citizens have since faced brutal occupation and repression. Benny Wenda is the spokesperson, the international spokesperson for the United Liberation Movement for West Papua and founder of the Free West Papua campaign. He lives in exile in the United Kingdom. In 2003, he was granted political asylum by the British government following his escape from custody while on trial in West Papua. Sadly, instead of personally welcoming Mr. Wenda to Uprising, I now have to introduce him over streaming video to the program. Welcome, Benny.
Thank you for having me.
What happened to you yesterday? We've been looking forward to this interview. I would have loved to have sat next to you in our studios, but you are across the Atlantic still. What happened, and why do you think your U.S. visa was canceled?
I was shocked, and I holding my bag and everything, and I was checking, and then suddenly there is something come out on the screen, and they told me that you hang on your bag and everything, and then they called the U.S. Homeland Security, and then they came back, and they stopped me, and then dragged me the corner, and then they questioned me, and I didn't know what going on, and I don't know what happening. And I just surprised. As a human level, I'm shocking because that's what wrong and what I done wrong, and because I have a British passport and I have a visa for 10 years, and then I don't know, just then the official told me that your visa was cancelled and revoked. So I just what the reason, and that's a full stop, no further questions. So
Wow. Well, it's certainly happened before to other human rights activists that they have been denied entry into the United States. Not clear what's happening. But when you were last here in the United States, which was, I believe, the first time that you had entered on that 10-year visa that you had been granted, you spoke with members of the United States Congress. You met with senators. Can you tell us what you asked them to do?
Yeah, I just visited, I think 2 times. I was in Washington, D.C., the meeting with the even State Department, and I was meeting the Congress and Senate and also staff. And last year was October, I visited and also meeting with the Senate and Congress staff and just seeking for help and also raise the concern and about what we campaign for human rights. Campaigning for our independent movement in West Papua, and some of the Congress, some of the staff and staffer, they don't know what's happening in West Papua. They don't know the issue of West Papua. We still struggle for our independence from Indonesian colonialism, and they didn't know. They're shocked, and this is something that because some of them a new generation, some of Congress and staffer. So yeah, they're really concerned. Also, as a human level, they're welcoming me and really open heart. So yeah.
Let's explain to our listeners and our viewers as well, because it's not an issue that's really talked about very much here in the United States. There is a level of repression and brutality facing West Papua's indigenous community that you represent that some have said rises to the level of genocide. Can you explain what exactly it is that Indonesia, what it exactly means for people to live in West Papua under Indonesian rule?
Yes, it's what happened in 1969. It was Indonesia called a referendum, and we West Papua called act of Indonesia and big power like U.S. and all British and European and Netherlands called act of free choice. We call act of no choice. It was used to the Dutch colony in 1960. Dutch were granted independent 8 months, and then after 1963, Indonesia illegally occupied. Since then until today, still colonized and killing, imprisonment, and it's almost half of the population. It's 500,000 men and women has been killed, committed by Indonesia. I call genocide committed by Indonesian military, and this is also moral obligations to United States and people of America could support, because first also America and Dutch and Indonesia involved directly, and that's why called a New York Agreement 1962 signed this big power, and 3 countries were signing, and without any West Papua consult. That's why I'm coming to U.S. just trying to share what our experience and what we've been through. And this is 21st century West Papua is still colonized by Indonesia, and Indonesia pretending they're good guys and they promote democracy. Maybe the other islands, other part of the Indonesia, but West Papua is a militarized zone in the Asia Pacific, and we are a prisoner. We are the slave. We are. This is happening right now.
Now, and Benny, can you also tell our audience a little bit about the way in which the repression is directly impacting an indigenous community in West Papua? I mean, does this compare, for example, to Indonesian rule of East Timor, for which there had been a major campaign in the United States? Is this part of that same sort of struggle?
Exactly. It's same military are now occupied in West Papua. East Timor, it's a Santa Cruz massacre. That's why people like any good man, and sees also eyewitness account, bring the testimony, and people of the United States find out, and that because the people of the United States believe in democracy and peace and justice. So that's why they're first place involved and campaigning widely. But West Papua case is like it's a cover-up, and this is 50 years the Indonesia not allow journalists into the country. 50 years in the world history, only West Papua banned the journalists. Amnesty International, International Peace Brigade, Red Cross totally banned. Even BBC not allowed, even ABC or any media not allowed. So that's why Indonesia get away with impunity, get away with their all this, because West Papua one thing that I need to tell you that West Papua is a very rich country, and also people at maybe Indonesia look the Papuan a different way because of they look at us as a subhuman, and also taking away the cutting down our trees and mountains.
When you mentioned that people think of you as subhuman, are you talking about racism against the indigenous community?
Yes, racism, discrimination is a part of our life. Even I myself have been through that treatment, and until today still. So even in the market or in the corner of market or street or in every villages are military holding the gun. And when I visit the US or UK on the street, I never seen a British military or American military on the street with the gun. But police, they do, yeah. But the military, I never seen. Maybe when they go out there and they're holding the gun. But in West Papua, every corner, every market, there is a military. If you have a beer or if you have a dreadlock or if you are not really suspicious, just beat you up in front of everybody, in front of, that's the I've been through.
And there have been a number of people that have been imprisoned as well. Can you tell us about, do you consider them people who have been imprisoned, activists, political prisoners? You yourself escaped, in a situation where you might have ended up a political prisoner. Now you're in exile.
This is one example. One of my colleagues, a well-known prisoner, is a Philip Karma. I myself, 2000, we are Committee Flag Raising 2000. I was charged 25 years, and I managed to run away. And Philip Karma continued to lead the people of West Papua, raise the Morning Star flag, peacefully prayer meeting in Abepura 2004. He's ended up a prison. And they're still happening in West Papua. And there's a lot of political prisoner. On the other hand, Indonesia said there is no political prisoner. And look at when Indonesia killed West Papua, they got the rank. And if the West Papua raised the Morning Star flag, 15 years. And that's a get away with impunity. So that's what's happening in West Papua.
Now, can you tell us specifically what the demands of the Free West Papua movement are? Do you want a complete end to Indonesian military occupation, but also what about reparations, freeing of political prisoners? Can you lay out the specific demands?
All the political prisoners in West Papua, they are campaigning for independence. So I myself are leading my people toward independence because we want to independent from Indonesia. After we're independent, then we can manage, and that's why this is our campaign is politically independent. And this is 21st century. We are campaigning for independence. Yeah.
What is Indonesia's official line on West Papua? What does it tell? What does the Indonesian authorities and government tell the world about West Papua? Is it just considered part of Indonesia now officially?
Indonesia claim of West Papua because the one claim that they claim is first, Indonesia claim over West Papua because of Dutch Indies, rest of the former Dutch colony, the automatic hours. But Indonesia got independent from Netherlands, 1945. West Papua never be part of the Indonesia, never. And they put the border from Maluku to Sabang. The West Papua is 20 years the part of the Dutch New Guinea. So after that, Dutch give independence 1960. But Indonesia claimed that no, West Papua is a former Dutch colony, automatic hours. But Dutch argue that no, these people are different. They are not connected with Indonesia. They culturally, geographically, ethnically, they are connected to Melanesia, like people of Papua New Guinea, Solomon, Fiji, Vanuatu, also Aborigines, Australia Aborigines. So nothing to do with Indonesia. But Indonesia really, that's why Indonesia militarily occupied 1963. We have an independent country, 1960. We have a parliament, we have national anthem, all the national symbol, but Indonesia really play clever game. If that's not give West Papua to us, we will join Cold War. That's why America and all the big power step in, and then this militarily handed over our country to Indonesia. So that's why Indonesia present in West Papua illegal. They are not right to claim West Papua be part of Indonesia.
You refer to Melanesia, and I'd like for you to explain that. Vanuatu, which is one of the islands there, Fiji, and of course Papua New Guinea, which shares land space with West Papua. These are, you're saying, part of essentially a conglomeration of Aboriginal cultures that ought to belong together?
Yes, Melanesia is made up, you got a Micronesia, you got Polynesia, that's our brother and sister, and also West Melanesia. West Papua is a part of Melanesia, and in the Pacific, West New Guinea is the biggest country, biggest islands in after Greenland, so second biggest island, and we are culturally and identically we are connected to all of us, so that's why we always call brother and sisters.
And so explain what the economic issues are. How has Indonesia economically exploited West Papua? Because, of course, if we follow the money, we can often make more sense of repression.
Very much. Indonesia present in West Papua, it's not about the human, about the respect as a human being, but they're present in West Papua because of our resources, natural resources, gold and copper and timber. That is the interest of our resources rather than human being. That's why they're trying to wipe out entire population. Yeah.
And what sort of environmental exploitation has also happened?
This is military, the agency of the logging company in West Papua, and also there is a biggest gold mine owned by Rio Tinto, Freeport McMoran base in New Orleans, and there are also the BP in West Papua.
So not only are there Western governments propping up the Indonesian regime, but Western corporations doing business with Indonesia in West Papua.
That's right. That's why I call this company operating middle of genocide, and why other hand support democracy and other hand supporting this illegal. I call Indonesia is like criminal, behaving like criminal. I treat my people like subhuman. That's why this company need to look at what they are doing, and I hope this is our land, this is our country. We can negotiate in the future, but at the moment, while my people been continue killing, my obligation to liberate my people from Indonesia. Then we can sit down with all these company to discuss, and then maybe we could do a better deal, and we can protect the environment together. Right. And at the moment, you deal with the criminal. They don't really care about our environment because the forest is our supermarket. The land and the mountain is our secret mountain. But all we are connected there. Those mountains, those forests. So yeah, that's what happened.
Well, I want to thank you, Benny Wenda, so much for joining us today, and we hope we can actually host you in our studio someday, and we'll post links to where listeners can find out and our viewers can find out more about your work. Thank you so much. Best of luck to you.
Thank you.
My guest, Benny Wenda, is the international spokesperson for the United Liberation Movement for West Papua, was scheduled for a 2-week speaking tour in the United States and would have been in studio with us, but was detained in London, where he tried to board a flight and was told his U.S. visa was canceled. Well, that does it for our program today. This is Uprising. Bipasha Shom is our senior producer. Anna Buss is our assistant producer. Christian Beck is our production coordinator. Dan Swerdlove is our technical director. Federico Garcia is our audio engineer. And Annie Mendoza is our social media coordinator. Subscribe to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/uprising with Sonali. Your subscription sustains our TV production. Our website is uprisingwithsonali.com, and our theme music is by Quetzal. I'm Sonali Kolhatkar, host and executive producer of Uprising. I'll see you next time.